Using polymer clay is more than just sculpting, and I'd like to show you two different techniques that don't really involve sculpting, but they're pretty fun and easy to do. So the first one, I'll show you the finished pieces, is this little windfish pin, and I made it using kind of a faux ceramic technique, and I'll show you how to do that. And the next one is kind of a faux opal technique, and you can make all different kinds of faux effects and stones and so many different things. And the polymer clay community online is really generous with their tutorials and techniques. And I found the faux ceramic technique on polymerclayweb.com, so you can check that out. There are a bunch of different other interesting techniques on there too. So I started out with a piece of white Primo clay, and I rolled it out so that it was thin and so that all the bubbles were gone. And then I just kind of used some reference material and used a needle and just sort of went along and just kind of drew into the clay. And the best way to do this is to have the needle at an angle and then just sort of lightly drag it along like that. You can kind of practice. If you try it straight up and down like this, you just kind of break the clay surface and it doesn't come out so even. So always try to angle it. Alright, so I'll just go along and continue adding some details. I'm using a cutter, but I'm not pressing all the way down, so it just leaves a little imprint in there. I'm going to give this whale some teeth in his smile. And a few more details here and there. So I won't go through the whole thing, but once you're done with this part, you cut it out with your X-Acto. Just kind of go along the edge and carefully cut it out. And then I have this on a piece of glass because it's easier to bake on some glass for something that you want to stay nice and flat. It doesn't work so well if something's roundy because you'll get flat spots on the bottom. But for this, I cut it out and then baked it, and then I got this. It's totally baked, and it's safe to bake polymer clay several times as long as you're careful not to bake it at too high of a temperature, because it can burn fairly easily. So I have a few color palettes here that I mixed together with a little bit of oil paint, it doesn't take much, and some Kato liquid polyclay. So I have a couple little color shaper tools here, just have to get the right one. I just like to take a contrasting color, usually dark blue, and this has been kind of sitting for a little bit, so it's sort of starting to get kind of hard, but it still works, it's still good. You just kind of press it into the indentations and just kind of wipe off the excess. So just kind of go along and fill in all those little areas so you'll be able to see them. This is a little hard to do one-handed, but it's working. So you can kind of see it sort of start to pop out now. And you can always just wipe off the excess with a paper towel too. So I'll just continue here. I've got all the lines filled in, and you can either leave it like this or you can add a little bit of color. So just to show you what it's like to mix some of them, I have a little palette here with some oil paints and some liquid polyclay. I like to have my reference picture or reference pin in this case so that I can make sure I have the right colors on here. The more Kato liquid polyclay you mix in here with the oil paint, the more transparent it will be, and you don't want to have too much oil paint in there, or it will get kind of cloudy and kind of bubbly too sometimes. So this is what is great about these color shaper tools. You can use a paintbrush if you like, but a paintbrush is really kind of difficult to clean in between the colors, but these just wipe off completely. So just kind of dab the color on there and sort of drag it around. So here's a close-up. Just kind of working on this area. If you go out of the lines, it's okay. You can just kind of scrape it back off. Just want a little, just kind of sitting on the top. And you can kind of mix the colors on top of the surface too if you need to. And I'm going to mix a little bit of this Viridian hue. And this color is a lot more saturated than the yellow color was, so I'll try to use less oil paint. Oop, this can get kind of messy. Always make sure you have your paper towel handy to wipe it off. Alright. You can go slowly. It's not really something you have to do quickly or anything. There you go. It's getting a little closer to being done. Here's some purple here. I try to put the same color on all the different areas at the same time, just for some consistency. And it really does work best if you only use a tiny bit of oil paint and more of the Kato liquid polyclay. And I like to choose things that are really colorful to do this technique with, just because it's more interesting. It's a little more challenging because you have to mix a lot of different colors, but it turns out so much brighter. Always make sure to have your reference material close by so you can keep looking at it and making sure you've got the right idea. And if you add too much in one area, it can kind of overflow once it's baking, but even then it kind of has a watercolor effect. It still looks kind of cool. It's almost done and ready to bake. Just have to add one more little part here. And if you don't feel like drawing your design, you can use a rubber stamp or a texture or anything really. There's a lot of applications for this particular technique. It's all ready to bake for the second time and the final time. So I'm going to put it on a piece of glass and put it into a preheated oven. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions, but remember that each oven can be calibrated a little differently. Certain ovens are hotter than others. I recommend putting in a test scrap of clay and just baking that and watching it. And I always have the dial set a little bit lower than the manufacturer's instructions. And if it needs to bake for longer, that's fine, but as long as it doesn't go above a certain temperature. If it starts to smoke, it's burning and it's on too high. And you don't want to breathe in those fumes because they can be toxic. And I like to have a clay dedicated oven. I use a toaster oven. I used one for, I think I got it for about $19 at Walmart or Target. That one lasted for many years, and it it eventually had to be used only outside because I burned too many things in there, and the smell is horrendous. So if you can, use it outside. The next thing I'd like to show you is how to make a faux opal, and this is a really quick technique. It just requires the Kato liquid polyclay, and I wouldn't recommend using the translucent liquid Sculpey for this technique because when it bakes it turns out a little cloudy, and this will be completely clear and you'll get a much better looking opal. And the second part of it is this glitter. It's kind of a, I think it's called cello glitter, and I bought it at Michael's, but you can probably get it at different art stores. But it's just a bunch of these little interesting iridescent plastic flakes. So the first thing I like to do is just get a little paper cup and put a little bit of this liquid polymer clay in the bottom, and then you just add a few of your little flakes, and you want it to be the consistency of oatmeal. And I got this particular technique from a tutorial on Donna Cato's site. She's a really well-known, excellent polymer clay artist, and she has her own brand of polymer clay. So once you get the flakes in there with your liquid polymer clay, just kind of mix it around. And if you need to add more of one or the other, that's fine too. I need more liquid polymer clay in here. So once it's all mixed up and you've got all the little flakes coated, then kind of dump it out on a piece of glass. So since I'm already going to bake this in the oven, it's kind of the perfect thing to use here. So just kind of scoop it out and flatten them out as much as you can. They don't quite flatten out because they're all kind of folded, but just kind of stick them together. It can be a little tricky to work with, but once you get them as flattened out as possible, you want to try to get rid of as many bubbles as you can. Then you put it in the oven and bake it, and when it comes out, it will be one little piece, and you just peel it off of there. And what you'll get is something kind of like this. This one kind of broke when I was peeling it in half, or peeling it apart. But it looks like opal. There's a smooth side that was face down on the glass, so when you peel it up, it's nice and smooth. And then there's a rough side. You can cut it into little pieces. You can put kind of a bezel around it. I put a kind of a rocky bezel on this one to make it look like a rustic, kind of realistic opal. I glued a pin on the back of it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning a couple of interesting little techniques, and I hope that you try some sculpting.